All right, I'm Taylor here from the TEDx community team, here with Melody Serafino, our media liaison, and she is very excited to share with all of you some best tips and tricks and practices in creating PR around your event. And of course, once she has a presentation for us, and she will be able to answer any questions you guys have afterwards. Just some general housekeeping. If you're able to share your camera with us, we'd love to see your faces. And just to make sure that your microphone is muted to ensure there's no feedback between us and you guys, and everyone just has a good audio experience. And without further ado, I'll let Melody kind of introduce herself and get us started. And we'll share our screen so you can see the presentation she has. And it is. Right.
Well, I'll start introducing myself as Taylor's pulling up the presentation. As Taylor mentioned, my name is Melody Serafino. I run a public relations firm here in New York City called Number 29 Communications. And I've had the pleasure of working with the TEDx team and TEDx organizers for now almost 8 years. So I've had the chance to probably meet some of you. We've definitely been on emails together. I will be sharing this presentation afterwards, so you'll all have it. And I do include my contact information, which is also on the TEDx website. But if anybody ever has specific questions, you can always reach out, email, phone, Skype, whatever is easiest. I know there's a lot of nuanced questions that come up about TEDx and PR. And I want to just start out by saying that, public relations in some ways is a bit of a misnomer. I like to say media relations, because really what we're talking about today is dealing directly with journalists and reporters. Ultimately, they are going to be the ambassadors to the public, because obviously their audiences are the general public. But they, today what I'd like to share with you are just what I call TEDx PR 101. So some foundation to get you started. I know not everybody has the PR skills or background, but I want to be able to at least give you some basic ideas to get you started. I understand that some of you work with your local PR agencies. Some of you are doing everything on your own. And often I think PR is the sort of last minute, oh shoot, I have to write a press release. So I just want to be able to give you some of the tools to leverage PR in a way that's valuable for your events. So if we can go to the next slide here. I know it's, so the first thing that I do, whether it's working with an event, whether it's working with a new client on a new campaign, is think about what is my PR. What is my PR? What is my strategy? Putting together a PR plan. And so, this is just a guide. It's really just a map. It's okay if you can't see that. I can see it fine. The PR plan can change in real time, but this helps you to sort of align your message. Think about what is the value of PR for you? What is the press strategy? Why do you want to get articles about your event? Why are you interested in having reporters come and attend the event and interview you and your speakers? What are the objectives? For some people, press is an opportunity to build awareness, raise awareness. Perhaps you're a first-time event and your community doesn't even know that you exist. So getting a story in your local newspaper, on your local television station is really important, just to let people know that you're here. In some cases, people like it because it helps to sell tickets. And in other cases, it may be that it's to attract sponsors. If you get a lot of great press this year, perhaps partners will be more interested in being involved the next year. So really thinking through what are the objectives of getting the press there or getting the press to cover, because that will help drive the strategy. And there's different types of press that align with those objectives. And then thinking through key messages. So what do you want to get across about your event? The truth is that there are thousands of TEDx events that take place every year. There are probably dozens of events that take place in your city, not necessarily TEDx events, but just events that are generally happening. So to host an event in and of itself is not particularly newsworthy. So you have to think about what about your event is distinctive. Are there speakers that will resonate in your community or perhaps even more globally or nationally? What about your event is compelling for media? Why would someone want to attend? Why would someone want to write about this? What audiences are you trying to reach? Is this an event that you think has national appeal or international appeal, or is this really something that's for the local community and it's most important to get that local press for the event? The other thing to think about is, what are the specific beats or topics that reporters are writing about? Because we want to be really relevant. We want to think about, is this press person actually someone who's going to care about what I'm doing? Just because they're writing for your local newspaper doesn't mean that this is necessarily in line with what they write about. So what are some of the relevant angles and hooks for them? And that can come from what they're writing about. It can also just come from generally, what are some of the issues being discussed in your community? What are some of the issues being discussed on a more global stage? And how can you tie into those so that you can make it feel really relevant and give it a sense of urgency? Because the thing I always think about as I'm writing a pitch, and we'll talk a little bit later about what it means to write a pitch versus a press release, is what is going to make this person, this reporter, cover this now versus saying, interesting, but I'll do this a month from now? What creates that sense of urgency? And so really tapping into what's going on in the public dialogue in your communities, in broader communities, can help place this and make it feel relevant. And then the last thing to think about as you're putting together that PR plan is, what is your timeline? Backing up from the date of your event and giving yourself enough time to put together your press materials, write a press release, do the research to figure out who are the right reporters you should be inviting or sharing so that you can get coverage. The worst thing is to email a reporter a day before an event and say, hey, we have this great event that's happening tomorrow, because more often than not, they've already got their schedules booked and maybe they really want to be there, but you didn't give them enough of a window to be able to put it on their schedule. So really thinking through that in advance and sort of actually writing out a timeline, maybe month by month, week by week, backing up 2 months, 3 months before your event, to think about when you want to say what, how you want to announce what, and when you want to let people know that this is happening. So I want to talk a little bit about harnessing the media and working with the media. The first thing to think about is being strategic. So press works when you understand how press works. And part of that is just doing your research and homework. So much of my job is literally Googling reporters and topics and trying to figure out, what are people writing about? What do they care about? What are the local reporters in your communities? What is compelling to them? Thinking about your speakers who you're putting on the stage and what are the topics that they're addressing. If you have someone who's speaking about healthcare, look for reporters who are writing about that topic. If you have someone who's speaking about technology, how do you sort of lure them in and get them interested? How do you give them something they need? You want to be seen as a resource for them. You don't want to just be seen as constantly promoting an event, telling them, we have this really great event, it's amazing, you need to be there. That doesn't mean anything, because to them, if you are overselling something, it almost feels like there's no substance there. So you have to think about, what about your event might make sense for them? Do you have someone who's announcing a new technology from the stage? Do you have someone who is sharing research from a report? Is there something that they're going to get from your event that they can't get elsewhere, or that they'll get it there first? And what is the experience going to be like? Not just seeing speakers on the stage, but give them an idea of the holistic experience. If they're at your event, what will they be able to do and experience? Who can they interact with? What are their opportunities on the ground? And understanding their role and what they can do for you. I mean, working with the press can be a very powerful thing. They are your ambassadors to the public. So how can you help shape the narrative for them? It's not to say that if you write a pitch a certain way that's necessarily how they're going to tell the story. But I like to go into every pitch, every time I'm talking to a reporter, in the back of my head, I sort of have a headline in mind that I'm trying to aim for. Of course, I have no influence over that headline being written, but it helps me to shape the narrative so that I can sort of steer them in the direction that I want them to go in, and not make them have to try to figure it out on their own. It's a little bit of spoon feeding so that they don't have to ask all of the questions. You're actually providing a lot of it for them. The second thing is being newsworthy. And this can be challenging because sometimes events just aren't newsworthy. They're interesting and they're fun and they're great people on the stage, but it's just great people on the stage, which is why sometimes I think when you're talking to your speakers, a good thing to talk to them about is what is new in their industry? What is new in their world? Is there new research that they can present for the first time on your stage? Is there a new technology that they can demo? Is there something they can announce in a way that's going to feel really fresh for reporters and for your audience? Because your audience wants to come and learn something they don't know as well. What are the local angles? Tapping into your local community to think about what is resonating right now and making sure that that's reflected in who you're putting on the stage. Why should they write about you today versus next week, next month, next year? Really giving them the sense that the story is here and now and that they shouldn't wait to tell it. They could be one of the first to break a story, to tell a story, to get this sort of access. And then lastly, sharing your expertise. So staying ahead of the news cycle, thinking about, are there things from the news cycle you can bring in as you're pitching? Having a point of view. Why are you doing this event? Why did you pick these speakers? Why now? What void is this filling? Give them something that they can use. Make them feel like there is real strategy behind this. There's a real story behind this. I mean, at the end of the day, PR is storytelling. You are the storyteller and you're feeding the story to the press. So you have the opportunity to really shape that story in a way that you want to see it. So I want to talk a little bit about pitches versus press releases. I know a lot of you do press releases. I have been in touch with many of you on approving and reviewing those, but there's a distinction between what a pitch is and what a press release is, and they should always go hand in hand. A pitch is really an email. It's a short and sweet, pithy, telling the story. It is the story that you want to come from what this person is writing. The press release is who, what, where, when, why, kind of the background, but the pitch is where you really sort of set the stage for what you want the press to understand and tell. And a pitch shouldn't be more than a couple of paragraphs. And when I say paragraphs, I mean 2 to 3 sentences each in a paragraph. Think about when you get emails from people and it's a lot of text, you either skim them or don't read them because it seems too labor intensive. And a lot of reporters, in some places, if you're in a major city, reporters can be receiving upwards of hundreds of pitches a day. So you need to find a way to cut through the clutter and get straight to the point. And also show that you understand the things they care about. And a good way to do that is to start out when you write to them by saying, hey, I saw your recent story about X, Y, or Z. Given that you seem to be covering this topic, I thought you might be interested because in our event, we have a speaker who is speaking on a similar topic. Would love to invite you to come and see that firsthand. We would give you a comp ticket. You have opportunity to interview our speakers. Here's the information, more about it below, but really sort of interact and not broadcast. In other words, show them that you've done your homework. You're not just trying to get them to do something for you, but stroke their ego a little bit. Show them that you understand what they care about rather than just telling them, we have this amazing event and you have to be there. But do it in a way where it doesn't take 4 paragraphs to get there. So short and sweet, cut to the chase. Up front, they should understand what you're asking of them. Make your message really clear. Make it clear to them that this is not a local TED event. This is a TEDx event. And a TEDx event is an independently organized event. It's licensed by TED. Make that message really clear up front because that will set the tone for how they cover your event. And too often I see press saying, this local TED event that took place, and it's not right. And, they do need the education. Most press people don't quite understand the distinction. So it's on us to be able to educate them in that way. A few things to avoid, as I mentioned before, overselling. You don't want to seem overzealous about your event. You don't want to seem like you're just trying to promote. Over pitching. Sending 10 emails to the same reporter usually doesn't work. I always suggest you send an email, you give them a few days to respond. If you don't hear back, you either pick up the phone. Perhaps if you have a personal relationship, you can very easily pick up the phone and follow up and say, hey, I just wanted to put this on your radar because I do think it's something you'd be very interested in. You could send them another email. But I would say no more than 2 or 3 emails in a few weeks span. And if you don't hear back, then you just sort of have to let it lie and move on to the next person. And never, never, never blast pitches and press releases. In other words, really be targeted about the list of reporters that you're asking to cover or attend an event. Make sure that they truly are people who understand the TEDx ethos or would be interested in a TEDx event, who you want to have there, who you think will tell valuable stories, or perhaps people that you know from the community who write for outlets that you think would make sense to be there on the ground. Because when you just blast out an email, people know that you're sending the same email to 50 or 100 different people, and the response rate is much, much lower. So some of the elements of a pitch that I like to think about as I'm writing them, the big idea. So in this case, why this event? Why now? How does it tie into what's happening in the world, in your community? What is the relevance to what's happening in the news cycle? What is the relevance to that reporter specifically? The more you can make that link for them, the easier it is, because believe it or not, a lot of times they don't think about the link themselves. You actually have to tell them, hey, this would actually be interesting to you because of this reason. Proof, when I say proof in this case, I really mean, perhaps this is your second or third event. You might want to reference that this is your second or third event. You've had a few TEDx talks that have made it onto TED.com, or you've had a certain amount of views on the TEDx YouTube channel. Some of your speakers have gone on to do really interesting things because of being on your TEDx stage. Thinking about what are the things that lend a little credibility about your event and about the speakers that you've curated. Some third-party validation as well. So perhaps you've had some speakers who have given you interesting feedback about participating in your event. This doesn't necessarily have to be in that opening pitch or email that you send, but as you're talking to a reporter, it's, might be something you want to drop in. We had this scientist who was on the stage, and because he was on our stage, he ended up meeting someone in our audience. Now they're working on this study together that's going to come out in 6 months. And it really helped sort of elevate his career and connect him to someone he might not have otherwise met. So just thinking through some of that, what's actually happening after the event too, or what has happened after past events that you can leverage to show that this is more than just a one-time event. This is more than just one day in a room with speakers, but that something else, this lives on beyond this. There's a community that has been built around this. And because of that, people are doing really interesting things and engaging in really interesting ways. And then lastly, thinking about trends. Perhaps there's something that you have a person on the stage who is reflective of a particular trend that you're seeing a lot in the news, or just generally making that tie-in for reporters is always really important, because reporters love to know that this is not just a one-off time. This is not a one-off thing, but there's actually some real engagement around it. There is a trend that's happening. So once you have your pitch crafted, it's important to also have a press release. And I'm going to be very honest about press releases. Press releases are great for getting all of the information in one place, getting all of your messaging the way you want it. They really serve as a backgrounder for your event versus a tool to get stories told. The reality is most reporters will not read an entire press release. And it's nuanced depending on the region and where you are in the world. I know in some places, people will literally copy and paste a press release, and that is the story that they put in the newspaper. So you want that press release to be really reflective of your proper messaging and make sure you have all the right key points in there. Here in the US, reporters rarely read an entire press release, but they will often reference it as they write their story. So it's important that you give them all of the appropriate and accurate information. And I think there's also value if you decide to put a press release over a newswire or you post it online. Of course, when people go to Google your event, that will populate. It's great for search engine optimization purposes. People pull that up. They now know more about your event, and it's in your voice, and it has all the right messaging. So a press release is 1 or 2 pages, probably shouldn't exceed that. It's the who, what, where, when, why of your event. Kind of to the point in that way. It should have quotes in there from the organizers, a little bit about why you're choosing to do this event, how you went about selecting your speakers. It should have the venue, you can absolutely put your sponsors in there, give them a little shout out. It should include the approved TED and TEDx boilerplates, which are on the TEDx website, but I'm happy to share those with people if they don't have the most updated versions. Those are the 1 paragraph about TED, about TEDx language that we have that needs to be included at the end of every single press release you send out. And that's really helpful because from a messaging and branding perspective, it really helps people to understand what the difference between TED and TEDx is. There should be language somewhere within the body of the press release that talks about this being an independently organized event, that it's not a TED event. Too often I get press releases that say, our local TED event with TED Talks. And you probably, if you've written that and you've received red lines from me, you know I go through and I put TEDx in there. I think a nice way to say it is, TEDx, name of event, an independently organized event licensed by TED, so that they understand what the correlation is. Of course, you should always include information about tickets and how people can get access to the event, your social media links, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, your event website, wherever you're posting real-time updates about what's happening. Speakers are really important. I know that some people like to do 2 and 3 and sometimes 4 press releases. I would say max 2 or 3 press releases. I think it's really important to be able to include speakers in that first press release. Sometimes I know TEDx organizers like to do sort of call to the community. We're hosting this event. We are looking for speakers. We're looking for sponsors. That's totally cool and understandable. But when you're actually announcing the event and you're talking about wanting to get people to buy tickets to your event, it's really important they understand what they're buying tickets for. I mean, how often have you just bought tickets to something and not known who's going to be in the room, who's speaking, what's the theme? So think about it from that perspective. So I think having those speakers, or at least having some of the speakers lined up and ready to go so that you can put that in the press release, is very helpful, because that is often what determines whether people show up. And then every press release, before it goes out to the media, needs to be sent to me. And I just ask for a courtesy 36 hours to give me time to review and approve. I usually get it back to people much, much quicker than that, but I just like to give myself a little buffer in case it's a very busy time for me. It's not for me to monitor what you're doing. It's more to make sure that branding is aligned, to help optimize your press releases. If I see a place where I think you could, make sure you're including your social media or put your event website in, perhaps you haven't thought about that, I can help make some of those suggestions. But every press release, no matter if you've sent one to me and then you're sending 2 more later on in the process, they all need to be sent to me first. A few things to just avoid, and these are things that come up time and time again when I'm reading press releases. So one is what I call firsts. A lot of times people get eager and they want to say, this is the first TEDx event that's taken place in Sacramento, California. It's a difficult thing for us to track on this end because it's possible that that could be true. It's also possible that maybe there hasn't been an event in TEDx in Sacramento for 5 or 6 years. And so this is the first in a long time. But you'll notice if you ever send me a release with that, I will retweak that messaging. And I think one of the nice ways to sort of say that without saying it is to say, this is the inaugural TEDx Sacramento event. This is the first ever TEDx and name of the event, versus saying this is the first TEDx event in the region, in the city, in the state, in the country. It gets a little bit tricky when you do that. So always avoid that, but you can say it is. If it truly is the first event of that name, absolutely say that. The other thing to just watch out for is co-branding. Every press release should have your TEDx, your specific TEDx logo on it, but it shouldn't have any of your sponsor logos on it. Your sponsors are welcome to send out their own press releases. They also need to send them through me first to make sure that they meet TEDx guidelines, that they have the TED and TEDx boilerplates on them. And obviously, if they're sending it out, it can be with their logo, but your event press releases should only be with your TEDx logo. They should never say that one of your sponsors is presenting or hosting or organizing your event. You're absolutely welcome to give, a little shout out to sponsors and partners within the release to say, grateful for their participation, but they should not be the ones who look like they're organizing the event. And then finally, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but thinking through that TED event language, sometimes I see people writing TED Talks when they're really TEDx Talks. It is not a local TED event. It is a local TEDx event licensed by TED. So just being really clear about that. I know a lot of people do social media for their events. I think it's a great way to build awareness, to build your digital community before you build your community in person. It's also a great way to announce speakers and to give real-time updates. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all great ways. You should not be promoting your sponsors on there, but you can be promoting your speakers, the activations you have. I think it's nice to actually put together a little bit of a social media plan as well that runs in conjunction with your PR plan. So as you're announcing things, whether it's press releases, pitches, you're also doing it on social, but you can also social media is an opportunity for you to curate your own content. So it shouldn't just be about talking about your event 100% of the time, because who wants to keep just seeing a tweet about, we have an event coming up in a week, we have an event coming up in 3 days. It's boring, no one cares. To really get the engagement that you want, I would think about thinking outside of just your event. What are there stories that are happening in your community that perhaps are relevant to some of your speakers? So you might want to flag them and say, this local story about X, Y, or Z was just posted. By the way, we have a speaker who's going to be at our event who's tackling the same issue or the same challenge. Or perhaps you have speakers from past events who have gone on to do really impressive things. Maybe they've been interviewed since. And so you want to make sure that you're giving them a little love, a little extra promotion to say, they were on the TEDx stage and now here they're being interviewed on this blog, on this podcast. And of course, once you have your TEDx talks live on the TEDx YouTube channel, great opportunity to share those links out with your community and to remind people about the great talks and give people who weren't at your event an opportunity to experience it. And I think that's also another great way to connect with national press. So sometimes an event might be only hyper-local, but perhaps you have a speaker who has some national relevance or resonance and is talking about something that is timely. And so you want to maybe do some post-event pitching to get their link to their talk out into the world, because maybe there's someone covering technology who is writing on a similar topic and will reference your talk. So now that you've done all of the things leading up to the event, it's time to think about the day of. And what I always like to do is, I always invite reporters to come to events that I'm working on, because I think the experience of being there is invaluable. No one really understands what it's like to be at a TEDx event until they experience being there. And oftentimes people don't really understand what the story is until they're in the room and they're meeting people and they're hearing the speakers live. So I like to put together for any press people who are coming to any event I'm doing what I call a media playbook. And it's really just a digital Word doc that I send over a couple days in advance to say, excited, looking forward to having you at the event. Here's everything you need to know. And in that document is, the one paragraph about what my TEDx event is, a little information about who their on-site contact will be with a phone number or an email. So if people want to request interviews in real time, they know who to go to. Information about how to get photos and video. One of our guidelines and rules, as you probably know, is people cannot take photos and video in the room. So often it's nice to be able to give them a link to a Flickr account where they can get photos in real time for their stories. Of course, you are able to provide photos, video, all of that to reporters after your event. With video, we just ask that for TV segments and radio segments, it's maximum 30 seconds of any talk. Beyond that, it gets into some distribution rules. And so we just want to keep a clear cutoff at 30 seconds. It is possible to have local TV stations come to your event if you have a room for them where you can set them up that's not in the speaker venue, that's in a quiet space where they can do interviews that doesn't disrupt what's happening on the stage. So if you have a person, and I really recommend this, whether it's a volunteer from your team, it probably shouldn't be the organizer themselves because they're going to be completely crammed with stuff that they're doing day of, but to assign someone on your team to actually be the person who's the media liaison day of, so that when reporters come to your event, and I don't recommend inviting 40 reporters to an event. I think you could have, pick five to 10 reporters that you want in the room based on the size of the event and who makes sense to be there, but have someone who is their guide that day. So when they have questions, they know who to go to. If they want to do interviews, they can help get them in front of the right speakers. And if you do have a local TV station who wants to do interviews on camera, you can set them up in a quiet room, and you have sort of a runner who can bring them the people they want to interview, the speakers, in real time. And they just know that they can't, no flash bulbs, no cameras in the venue itself. It's really distracting for people who are on the stage, and it also just helps with quality control as well. And all of this is what you put in that press media playbook that I talked about. So it should have all the information a reporter would ever need to know about getting access to photos, video, interviews. I would include the About TED and About TEDx boilerplates just as a reminder as to what the difference is. A day of itinerary or agenda, so they know exactly who's speaking and when they're speaking. It's also a great way to give shout outs to some of your sponsors who are there. Perhaps they have interesting activations that are taking place. Highlight those within there, so you're actually steering press in the direction of some of these things, letting them know that these are some of the in between the talks, these are some of the things they can experience. And then just general press guidelines. And we don't have that many guidelines outside of the photo and video guidelines. But what I would say is, I like when press comes to one of my events, I like them to feel like they're just another audience member. I don't want them to feel like they have to sit in a really specific place and feel like they're an outsider watching on the inside, watching from the outside. I think that particularly with TEDx, you have to be engaged and part of the community to really understand how valuable a TEDx event can be. So you want them to feel like they're just another attendee. That said, you also want to respect your other attendees. So you don't want press to feel like they can just start writing about all the people they saw at your event, because there's privacy issues with that. And you want to be careful. You want everybody to be there having a good time, not having to be careful about what they say and who they say it to. So we just ask press to enjoy the event like any other attendee. If they want to do interviews with attendees, they have to ask them. They have to say that, would you like to give us a quote about being here today? No pictures of attendees without their permission. No writing a list of names of who's attending the event without saying to them, is it okay that I say that you're at this event? We just want to be really respectful of everyone in the room, because it is a community and we want them to feel like they are there and they're part of the community. And then post-event is a great opportunity to follow up with everybody that you pitched, whether they were in the room or not, to let them know we had a great event. Our videos, our talks are now live on the TEDx YouTube channel. Here's what happened that day. We had 200 people in the room. We had a mix of ages. We had X amount of speakers on the stage, 5 performers. You can do some of those quick stats, which you can also include in the media playbook, because a lot of press will ask, how many people are here? Where are they from? How many speakers on the stage? I think a little quick guide, a little sort of TEDx by the numbers is often very helpful for people, but you want to make sure you keep the conversation going. And it's also a great opportunity to start promoting some of the TEDx talks that come out of your event, to follow up with reporters and say, hey, I know you're writing about nutrition right now. We had this great nutritionist who spoke at our event, and I thought you might want to see her talk. Or if you're writing any stories about this particular topic, perhaps you'll link to her talk. And that's a really great way to give some legs to your event beyond the day, and to keep them engaged, because you hope that they will cover again, come back the following year, and you want to create that nice relationship. And I should say that, press, you should feel absolutely empowered to do interviews about your event with press. I often get emails from TEDx organizers saying, is it okay if I do an interview about it to promote it? Absolutely. The only thing that we ask is that you speak about your TEDx event and not about TED as a whole. If reporters have questions about the TED organization, about anything that veers into more TED territory, please just connect them with me and I'll make sure they get to the right person and get the right answers. Where you can be really helpful is sharing the story about your event, why you chose to be a TEDx organizer, how it's helped your local community, what you hope to get from organizing this event, who were your speakers, how did you go about finding speakers? That is all your personal story, and I think that can be really powerful. I mean, no event happens without a team of people behind it, and sometimes those people's stories are really great to be told. So I absolutely encourage you to have profiles done on yourself that talk about why you're doing this. That's it's great marketing for TEDx, frankly, but it's also great marketing for your event. People want to understand the person behind everything. So I just wanted to, in final conclusion, share with you my contact information and open it up to questions, but you can always feel free. This is my email, my direct phone number. I talk to a lot of you every week. Please, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to answer your questions. Don't forget to send me your press releases. And then I guess we'll open it up to questions if people have questions.
If anyone wants to hop in and ask questions, go right ahead. Or if you're unable to come on camera and share your video, feel free to write them in all caps in the chat. Yeah, anyone want to chime in?
I have a question.
Sure.
This is actually post-event. This happened just over the weekend, and I'd like to try to promote more of it. One of our former speakers was featured in an article in the local newspaper. And of course, I grabbed it and I linked to it and put it on our social media to say, hey, look, our former speakers. But is there a way, do you have any suggestions on how to get the paper to, or TV or the media to, when they do a follow-up story like that, to recognize that this person's been in TEDx?
Yeah, so I think that's a great opportunity. And hi, Randy, I'm pretty sure we've been on emails together before. I think that's a great opportunity to actually share that speaker's talk. So even though the story may have already been written, if it's an online story, I always like to follow up with the reporter and say, saw your story and I just wanted to make sure you saw this talk. This is, they spoke at our TEDx Lincoln event and I thought it would be an interesting thing to incorporate. And maybe they can add it into a link to the talk in their story. Maybe they can promote it on their social. The other thing is, I don't know if there's a correlation between what this person is being written about and their time on the TEDx stage. But if you can make that, it's always the hardest thing to do, but if you can make that bridge or correlation between them being on the stage and then now what they're doing, that's a great story to tell. And maybe you could also profile the speaker on your website and, give them a little bit of an extra boost, and also let them know that as they're doing interviews to feel free to share their TEDx talk. All speakers should know that's a tool for them to share as well.
I love the idea of sending a note to the reporter and saying, hey, thanks for the story, and here's a link to their talk. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have a couple of questions in the chat here. Natalia is asking, what about the number of medias to invite?
Yeah, so I leave it up to there's not a set number. I don't mean to say that you need to have, a certain number of reporters at your event. I think what's comfortable and what makes sense. For some people, that might be 5 reporters. For some of the huge events with, 1,000 people, it might be 25 reporters. You have to kind of go with your gut on that one. But I think that's where doing the research to understand who makes sense to be in the room is so important, because it's not worth having 10 reporters there who don't really understand what TEDx is, who haven't sort of been educated on it, and walk away without being able to tell a valuable story. And I think a lot of that work can be done up front. Once you connect with a reporter, I think it's really important to sort of handhold them through that process. It's not just an invitation and then you go radio silent. It's an invitation and it's a, hey, and by the way, here are a few speakers I think might be of particular interest to you. If you'd like to do interviews with them, please let me know. And I'm happy to make that connection either, on site or afterwards. But I think that's why doing that research is important. I don't want to give you a set number because it depends on where you are in the world too, right? I mean, in New York City, I could invite 100 reporters to an event. It doesn't mean they'd all show up, but I think obviously we have a huge media pool here. So I think use your best judgment and just make sure that they're reporters who make sense to be in the room.
I have another question from Mark.
Hi, Mark. Mark and I have talked many a time. So yes, reporters are absolutely allowed to interview speakers, and they can take their own photos for publication as long as it's not in the theater as long as the speaker's not on the stage. If they want to do that, outside of the theater, outside of the venue, somewhere in a quiet room, absolutely possible. But a lot of reporters end up wanting pictures from the stage, and that's just where you guys have to be the ones to provide those images.
So we have another question from Mahi asking for any tips to get the media to stay for the duration of the event.
It's always a hard one and this is hard for me too, because a lot of times reporters just can't take 8 hours out of the office to be at an event. They're working on multiple stories. They might be on deadline. So a lot of times what I will do is I will direct, if a reporter says to me, listen, I don't think I can stay the whole time, but tell me, what part of the day should I come for? I like to sort of direct them based on their interest or based on what story I think I want them to tell. It's hard to force them to stay the whole day. I say if you can get them there for some amount of time, it's better than not getting them there at all. So it's just you can't force them. I would just direct them to say, hey, you might want to stay for the afternoon session because in the afternoon this person is speaking and I think it's really relevant to what you've been writing, and that might get them to stay for a little bit. There's also, depending on your venue, perhaps you have a room where reporters can go and do some work when they can't be in the venue watching the speakers from the stage. If there's a room where you could have a live stream TV so they can be watching what's going on, but also getting some work done with a Wi-Fi connection, that I find is really helpful, because a lot of times reporters can't stay because they need to be on their computers, and they can't be on their computers in the room, or they just need to be in a quiet space. So if you set up a little bit of a press room for people, that's a quiet space that you tell reporters, we have this room available. If you need to go do some work, if you need to go do quiet interviews, please feel free, you have access. That's a nice way to kind of keep them in the room too.
We have another question from Mira.
Okay, so asking about the 30-second limit for video. So yes, the media can determine what 30 seconds they want to use. It doesn't have to come from your team. And often they will know what 30 seconds they want. I've had many press people reach out to me to say, I just need this snippet from when this speaker said this. And so they know exactly what they want. And you can always help direct them if they say, okay, I need 30 seconds, but I'm not quite sure, and you have a 30 seconds you love, absolutely feel free to tell them, hey, between this time and this time, I think that would be that's where the talk was most poignant. Absolutely. But most of the time the media will capture that on their own.
Anyone else want to ask questions before we wrap things up? All right, well, like Melody said, we'll be sharing this presentation she had and the archive of the video, and we also have an archive of highlights and notes that will be put all on the TEDx Hub for you guys to access. And just thank you again to Melody for being here.
Thank you guys for joining.
If you have any questions, you can reach out to either Melody or I, and we're happy to answer any questions you have. So thanks for joining.
Great to see some familiar faces. Yeah. Hi, Anna and Kat.
All right, have a nice day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.